Sam's introduction. In Teenage Lesbian begins with an image that every queer woman, especially those who grew up in the 1990s or early 2000s, instantly recognizes: the quiet, self-protective walk to school with headphones acting as armor, a shield against a world that has already told her in too many ways that she is wrong, suspect, deviant, or simply other. And the violence that erupts against her in the opening scene captures the emotional truth of what it felt like to grow queer, in a time when the word lesbian itself was used as both accusation and weapon, where bullying was not just cruelty, but a warning about social exile. So when Sam is cornered, taunted, and thrown into a dumpster, the film isn't simply portraying physical harm. It is revealing the soul-deep wound of being marked early in life as unacceptable, of having your budding selfhood thrown back at you as trash. And this becomes the emotional foundation for everything that unfolds later with Nicole. Because queer women know that the first step toward falling in love with another woman often begins on the heels of learning what it costs to be visible, and how visibility can make you a target long before it makes you feel whole. The moment at home afterward where Sam presses frozen peas to her bruised face while her father tries to coax the truth out of her is a portrait of the silent negotiations so many queer girls have with themselves and with the people who care for them but don't yet see them. The tug between wanting to protect your own privacy and wanting someone, anyone, to look at you and understand without being told. And Sam's refusal to speak is not simply stubbornness, but the instinctive fear that to speak is to confess something larger, something she can't yet name or trust the world with. Her father's insistence that she act like a grown-up rings painfully true to LGBTQ+ viewers because queer kids are often forced to grow up much sooner than their peers, not because of maturity, but because of pressure, scrutiny, and the need to navigate danger without ever revealing the full truth of what's happening inside them. By the time we arrive at the classroom 2 weeks later, Sam's nearly healed black eye becomes a visual reminder of the resilience queer teens must cultivate long before they fully understand who they are. And when Nicole slips her that note, asking if she wants to partner up, the gesture lands with a mix of sweetness and a subtle ache, because this is the first sign that Sam might be invited, for just a moment, into a world where girls like her might not be alone. The scene in Nicole's bedroom is so quietly charged not because of anything physical happening, but because of the emotional stakes for someone like Sam, who has never had the luxury of being close to another girl without censoring herself. Sam sits on the floor while Nicole lounges nearby, and every small interruption, every curious glance, every question Nicole asks is loaded with the possibility of recognition. The possibility that this straight, outgoing, socially accepted girl might be drawn to her for reasons Sam can hardly allow herself to imagine. When Nicole asks why Sam didn't go to her birthday party, Sam's instinct to retreat into downplaying, into pretending she simply isn't into those things, mirrors the way so many queer girls respond to social invitations, because showing up means being seen, and being seen means risking exposure, desire, humiliation, or heartbreak. So Sam's avoidance is not just about the party but about her entire experience of adolescence. Hover close enough to feel connection, but far enough to stay invisible. The moment Nicole leans in too close, searching Sam's face, the film unlocks something delicate and universal about queer longing. How terrifying it is when the girl you've secretly admired suddenly notices you back, and how that awareness turns your entire body into a question. Am I imagining this? Is she just friendly? Am I reading into things? Has she noticed something about me that I've tried so hard to hide? This fear of misreading, of projecting desire where it doesn't belong, is one of the defining emotional conflicts of queer girlhood, and the movie captures it with quiet precision. When Nicole suggests they nap together, the request becomes symbolic, not about a bed or a physical act, but about intimacy in its rawest, most disarmed form, the invitation to share space where walls fall away, where neither girl can hide behind conversation, where the silence itself becomes the language. For Sam, this moment is almost unbearably charged because lying beside another girl, even in the most innocent, non-physical way, represents both the fulfillment of a fantasy she is terrified to admit and the confrontation of a truth she has worked tirelessly to suppress. Nicole's distraction, her repeated glances, her inability to focus on the project, all suggest her own inner conflict. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps attraction, perhaps simply a fascination with someone who exists outside the rigid lines of normalcy that Nicole herself has always been expected to color within. And queer viewers recognize this dance immediately. The tentative shifting between emotional closeness and emotional retreat, the shared silence that feels heavier than words, the subtle movements that aren't physical signals but emotional ones, the way girls test the temperature of safety with one another. In treating the bed symbolically, the film uses it as a metaphor for emotional nakedness, two girls entering a shared space where vulnerability can no longer be avoided, where Sam's longing and Nicole's uncertainty collide in a moment heavy with the possibility of discovery. Not of bodies, but of identities. Sam lying there, heart racing, is not about desire acted upon, but desire awakened. The realization that the feelings she has spent her whole life pushing down are no longer content to stay quiet, especially not in the presence of someone like Nicole, whose warmth, beauty, and curiosity represent everything Sam wishes she could move toward without fear. Nicole's subtle movements are not romantic signals in this analysis. They are symbolic gestures of a girl wrestling with her own questions, curiosity about another girl, fascination with someone who feels different, confusion about what she's feeling, or maybe even an unconscious gravitation towards someone she senses understands her in a way boys never have. For Sam, this moment is a crossroads. She can either continue hiding, continue shrinking, continue letting the world define her through its violence and hostility, or she can breathe, stay in that quiet space, and allow herself to imagine that she is worthy of being wanted, admired, or chosen. For queer audiences, women who lived through decades where lesbian identity was spoken in whispers, teenagers who discovered themselves in stolen glances across hallways, survivors of bullying who found first love in friendship, the emotional truth of this moment is deeply resonant because it portrays how queerness often blooms in silence, in ambiguity, in moments where the world briefly falls away and two girls share something fragile and unnamed. It also reflects the immense psychological pressure queer girls face, the constant fear of losing friendships if their feelings are revealed, the dread of misinterpreting a moment and being humiliated, the worry that every gesture of closeness from another girl is simply friendliness rather than reciprocal desire, which forces girls like Sam to live in a perpetual state of emotional self-surveillance. Meanwhile, Nicole's role symbolizes the girls who have privilege, social acceptance, desirability, popularity, and yet still feel the pull towards someone like Sam, someone outside the mainstream, someone whose difference becomes magnetic rather than repellent. Their dynamic challenges society's discomfort with women expressing tenderness toward each other, because even their innocent emotional closeness is immediately sexualized or dismissed as experimentation in the cultural imagination. The film refuses this by presenting the moment as something sincere, emotionally complex, and rooted in identity rather than spectacle. Sam's journey is just beginning, and the scene makes clear that the struggle ahead is not only external, facing bullies, facing a world hostile to lesbian identity, but internal, as she learns to trust her own feelings, recognize the legitimacy of her desire, and understand that longing itself is not shameful. Nicole becomes both catalyst and mirror, someone who reflects back the possibility of being seen and being wanted, someone who inadvertently teaches Sam that shame dissolves when intimacy is rooted in presence, compassion, and authenticity rather than fear or pretense. In this way, the scene is a profound meditation on queer adolescence, the moment when repression cracks and light begins to seep through, when the heart recognizes itself even if the mind cannot yet articulate it. For queer women watching, especially those whose first moments of self-discovery happened in bedrooms, on floors during study sessions, on quiet afternoons with girls who made them feel both safe and terrified, the scene becomes an emotional homecoming, a reminder of the first time they felt something unmistakably real and undeniably theirs. And for women in general, the scene speaks to universal themes: longing for connection, fearing vulnerability, yearning to be understood, and navigating the difference between who the world expects you to be and who you truly are. In portraying these two girls sharing a symbolic moment of emotional closeness, Teenage Lesbian honors the messy, fragile, transformative truth of queer awakening without sensationalizing it, insisting instead that young women's emotions are worth taking seriously, that their fear and their hope matter, and that even the quietest moments between them can mark the beginning of becoming visible to themselves and to the world. In this extended portion of Scene 1 from Teenage Lesbian, the film deepens its exploration of Sam's internal and external conflicts by placing her in a series of environments where she is expected to perform a version of femininity and heterosexuality that never truly belonged to her, and where the weight of other people's expectations becomes both emotionally suffocating and painfully clarifying, creating a landscape that many queer women, especially those who came of age in environments of scrutiny, silence, or compulsory heterosexuality, will recognize immediately as the backdrop of their own coming-of-age stories. Because what appears on the surface as a typical high school party scene actually becomes a microcosm of how queer girls are policed, fetishized, dismissed, and misunderstood long before they have the language, safety, or community to explain who they really are. The film begins by anchoring Sam's emotional state in two earlier moments: the bullying that leaves her physically bruised and the quiet, domestic tension with her mother. So when she eventually arrives at the party, she is already carrying the invisible aftermath of being harmed, minimized, and denied emotional refuge by the people she wants most to understand her. And this emotional exhaustion shapes every interaction that follows. She is too tired to fight, too tired to explain, too tired to pretend, and yet also too afraid to reveal the truth, creating a delicate emotional tightrope that many queer viewers will recognize as the lived reality of queer adolescence. The earlier bullying scene, where she is cornered, shoved, humiliated, and called a slur, is not portrayed for shock value but for emotional accuracy. It speaks to the way queer girls often experience violence not for what they have done, but for what others project onto them, for who others fear they might be, or for simply existing in a world that polices femininity, desire, and nonconformity with relentless intensity. This violence reverberates into the scenes with her father and mother, where the adults in her life, though concerned, cannot decode her silence. They interpret her pain through their own frameworks of responsibility, discipline, and expectations for adulthood, failing to grasp that her refusal to explain has less to do with immaturity and everything to do with fear. Fear of confirming their worst fears, fear of disappointing them, fear of losing what little stability she still has, and fear of saying out loud something she isn't yet ready to hold fully in her own hands. By the time Sam arrives at the party, she is walking into a crucible where internalized shame, external pressure, and the complicated dynamics of teenage social life collide. And the filmmakers choose to center her emotional experience rather than the spectacle around her, showing how even a loud, crowded room can feel isolating when you are carrying the weight of a secret that others keep trying to decode or dismiss. At the party, Sam is surrounded by people who are carefree, intoxicated, and wrapped up in their own dramas, creating an atmosphere of chaos that contrasts sharply with her quiet discomfort. And this contrast mirrors the broader queer experience of being surrounded by people who assume heterosexuality is the default, even as they unknowingly ostracize or pressure the queer girl standing right next to them. The conversation with Matt crystallizes this dynamic. He approaches Sam with what he frames as curiosity, but it is clear that his questions are shaped by entitlement and a lack of empathy, reflecting how heterosexual men often feel they're owed explanations for queer identity, as if a girl's orientation is something that must be proven, justified, or made sense of through their lens. When he asks Sam how she knows she is gay, he positions heterosexuality as the unquestioned norm and queerness as something that must be interrogated, tested, or validated through performance. And his insistence reveals not genuine curiosity, but a desire for reassurance that queerness is mysterious, foreign, or fixable. Sam's response, "How do you know you're straight?" is quiet but powerful, and for many queer viewers, it is a moment of recognition, the moment you realize that your orientation isn't an experiment or a misunderstanding, but an intrinsic part of who you are, requiring no justification, no evidence, and no performance. Yet Sam is still fragile, still guarded, and still afraid, which makes her unwillingness to appease him, her refusal to flirt back, joke back, or give him the reaction he wants, a subtle but radical act of self-protection. When the scene shifts to the coercive dynamic between Matt and the two girls he pressures into performing for him, the movie highlights a crucial tension in queer female adolescence: the difference between authenticity and performance, between real desire and the voyeuristic expectations imposed by straight men who sexualize queer girlhood for their own consumption. Sam is not involved in the performance, but her presence as a witness underscores the discomfort many queer women feel when society treats female same-gender intimacy as entertainment rather than truth, as spectacle rather than connection, and as something meant to titillate rather than illuminate emotional meaning. The two girls consenting to entertain Matt's fantasy are not villainized, but the situation itself becomes a commentary on how young women, especially in the 1990s, were often pressured to perform versions of intimacy for male validation, even when it had nothing to do with their own orientation or curiosity. And this creates a mirror for Sam. While she is struggling to understand her own desire, the world around her continues to warp queer intimacy into something performative, cheapened, or meant to please a male gaze. This contrast deepens our understanding of Sam's isolation. She yearns for connection, for tenderness, for someone like Nicole who sees her without distorting her, but the party reinforces the fear that any expression of desire might be misinterpreted, sexualized, or mocked. The scene with her mother earlier, awkward, strained, emotionally disconnected, adds to this fear because Sam has no model for vulnerability, no safe space to articulate her confusion, and no emotional roadmap to navigate these moments. She is held together by silence, by caution, by self-preservation, and when confronted by Matt's invasive curiosity or the voyeuristic scene unfolding nearby, she is forced to retreat even further into herself. Many queer women watching this film will recognize these moments intimately. The forced conversations with boys who try to understand your sexuality in all the wrong ways. The pressure to participate in heterosexual rituals that feel surreal or dishonest. The discomfort of witnessing female intimacy treated like a prop. The fear of revealing too much. And the weight of knowing that others view your orientation as something to analyze rather than accept. What makes this entire section emotionally resonant is that Sam is not dramatic or flamboyant in her reactions. She is quiet, tentative, and visibly uncomfortable, which reflects how many queer women navigate unsafe or ambiguous spaces, not through confrontation but through withdrawal, internalization, and vigilance. And this interiority is important because it shows that queer awakening is not always loud or triumphant. Sometimes it is quiet, painful, and lonely, especially when the spaces around you feel hostile or invalidating. The party scene becomes a turning point not because anything overtly transformative happens, but because it clarifies the kind of intimacy Sam does not want, the kinds of conversations she will no longer entertain, and the kind of emotional presence she is longing for but has not yet found. The discomfort she feels is not a failure of courage, but a recognition of her own boundaries, her own authenticity, and her refusal to perform queerness for the benefit of others. And this refusal becomes a stepping stone toward the later moments in the film when she begins to trust Nicole, begins to open up, and begins to imagine a version of queerness shaped not by fear or shame, but by connection, possibility, and self-acceptance. By situating Sam in such an emotionally charged environment early in the film, the story reminds viewers that queer identity is forged not only in moments of tenderness or realization, but also in moments of misunderstanding, coercion, voyeurism, silence, and emotional misalignment. And this complexity is what makes the film resonate so strongly with queer women who have lived through similar dynamics. Ultimately, this portion of Scene 1 underscores how the world around Sam is loud, chaotic, and demanding, while her queerness is quiet, internal, and still forming. And the tension between those two states is what makes her journey both painful and beautiful. In this second scene of Teenage Lesbian, the film deepens its emotional core by shifting focus from the chaotic, painful fallout of Sam's earlier experiences to something more intimate, introspective, and quietly transformative, illustrating the interior world of a young queer woman who is trying to make sense of herself in a decade where language, community, and representation were scarce, and whose memories now surface with tenderness, sorrow, and a longing to understand the moments that shaped her. The scene begins with a slice of everyday life, hallway interactions, small talk with classmates, and the faint hum of normalcy. But the weight of Sam's private struggles hangs heavily over everything, manifested in the way she shrinks back from crowds, hesitates before speaking, and carries an almost invisible tension in her body, as if she is always guarding something delicate and breakable inside herself. And this is where the film captures something deeply familiar to queer women who grew up in environments where their identity felt precarious, unsafe, or unwelcome. The warmth of her father's interactions, the attempts at connection over Christmas, gifts, the gentle teasing about her grandma's present, all exist in heartbreaking contrast to the fact that Sam is still unable to let him into her emotional world because she has already learned, through bullying, through silence, through shame, that visibility often comes with danger, misunderstanding, or rejection, and this fear textures everything she does even when the people around her don't realize it. Which is why the tension between Sam and her closest friend JC resonates so profoundly with women who have experienced the complicated, often painful intersections between friendships and identity. Sam's growing bond with Nicole, the girl who once seemed impossibly far away, continues to haunt her thoughts, and the mere mention of Nicole's name sets off a chain of emotional reactions: confusion, longing, fear, self-doubt, because she is still trying to understand what happened between them, what it meant, and why something that felt so emotionally charged could collapse into rejection and cruelty. And this internal turmoil is intensified by the social landscape of the 1990s, where lesbian identity was so rarely discussed openly that many young women interpreted their feelings through guesswork, secrecy, and the scraps of representation they could find. Which is exactly why Sam's interactions with Meg, the older queer woman she meets at the party, become so symbolically rich. Meg represents possibility, self-knowledge, and chosen community, the kind of queer elder that so many LGBTQ+ people desperately needed but rarely had. And her presence in the scene offers Sam something she has never experienced before: a conversation grounded in acceptance, empathy, and shared understanding, rather than pressure or confusion. The moment Meg finds Sam upset outside the bathroom, shaken from being misgendered and overwhelmed by the emotional fallout of Nicole's rejection, is framed not as a rescue, but as an act of recognition. Meg sees the signs because she has lived them, the same way queer women across generations pass down silent knowledge through a glance, a nod, or a gentle, knowing smile. When Meg tells Sam that she has been through something similar, that liking girls who don't like you back, or who like you until the moment it becomes too real, is a familiar heartbreak in the queer community. The moment resonates with a truth that countless LGBTQ+ women understand deeply, because compulsory heterosexuality has shaped decades of longing, misreading, secrecy, and emotional risk, leaving many young queer women trapped in bonds that promise tenderness yet end in confusion or rejection. And the film treats this with remarkable sensitivity by never mocking Sam's naivete or amplifying her pain, but instead allowing her confusion to be human, relatable, and grounded in the reality of what it means to develop feelings without a roadmap. This is also where the film challenges society's discomfort with women's emotional intimacy, because Sam's interactions with Nicole earlier in the film, swapping notes, lying side by side, navigating moments charged with possibility, would be harmless and even celebrated if they were between a boy and a girl. But because they involve two young women, the same closeness becomes a source of fear, taboo, and punishment, both from Nicole, who lashes out to protect her own social standing, and from the broader world around them, which polices queerness through ridicule, rumor, and shame. And this double standard is at the heart of what makes Sam's story so resonant for LGBTQ+ viewers. Queer longing is often framed as predatory, desperate, or delusional, especially in high school settings where heteronormativity is aggressively enforced, and Sam's quiet, earnest desire to understand herself becomes twisted by others into something ugly, something she must apologize for, hide from, or rationalize, and the moment Nicole rejected her with disgust becomes a shaping trauma, not because the girl she liked didn't reciprocate, but because she reinforced the cultural narrative that same-gender desire is something repellent, laughable, or humiliating. The film refuses to sensationalize this pain, instead portraying it through Sam's slumped posture, her numb responses, her struggle to articulate what happened when Meg gently encourages her to open up. And it is in this emotional honesty that the scene becomes profoundly queer in the truest sense, rooted in vulnerability rather than spectacle, growth rather than titillation. Meg's compassionate listening and gentle humor offer Sam a lifeline, not in the sense of romantic interest, but in the sense of community, validation, and mentorship, which many queer women remember seeking desperately during their teenage years, especially in pre-internet decades when isolation was the default experience of LGBTQ+ youth. Even Meg's playful attempt to teach Sam how to pick up a girl is not about seduction, but about helping Sam imagine a world where she doesn't have to be ashamed, where there is a future in which she can speak openly, approach someone confidently, or at least entertain the idea that she deserves mutual affection instead of secrecy or shame. And it is this forward-looking energy that gives the scene its emotional power, the physical environment. Meg's apartment, warm and lived in, filled with the textures of a young adult carving out her own space, contrasts with Sam's own life, which is cluttered with silence, uncertainty, and internalized fear, creating a symbolic juxtaposition between where Sam is and where she might someday go. The emotional through-line of the scene is not about romance, but about affirmation, about one queer woman telling another that her feelings are real, understandable, and worthy of exploration, an act of care that stands in stark contrast to the judgment, confusion, and rejection Sam receives from her peers. The conversation between them becomes a small but significant turning point, a moment where Sam's internalized shame is interrupted, even briefly, by the possibility that she is not alone, not broken, and not unlovable. And for queer viewers who grew up in hostile or unsupportive environments, this moment resonates like a quiet exhale, a reminder of the first time someone saw them not as a problem to solve, but as a person deserving of compassion and understanding. Even the awkwardness of Meg's attempts to coach Sam through a hypothetical flirtation becomes meaningful, because it shows queerness not as something shameful or tragic, but as something ordinary, learnable, playful, and human. And this reframing is essential for viewers who spent years absorbing messages that painted their desires as aberrations. The scene culminates in a sense of renewal rather than resolution, because Sam is still hurting, still unsure, still afraid, but the world around her has expanded. There is now at least one person who understands, at least one voice telling her that her identity is valid, that her experiences make sense, and that her future does not have to be defined by rejection. And this emotional shift is one of the most important arcs in LGBTQ+ storytelling, the moment when isolation cracks open just enough for possibility to slip through, and the film handles it with remarkable tenderness, making Scene 2 a powerful, relatable portrait of what it means to grow up queer in a world that insists you stay invisible, and what it means to find, even briefly, someone who sees you clearly and tells you that you are enough. Scene 3 of Teenage Lesbian unfolds as a quiet yet emotionally potent chapter in Sam's coming-of-age journey, one that captures the delicate, hopeful, and often heartbreaking process of forming connections, while queer in a world that gives young women almost no guidance on how to navigate their feelings, their identities, or the fragile beginnings of desire. It begins in a seemingly casual, everyday environment. Friends chatting after school, sharing cigarettes, trading jokes, complaining about parents. But beneath the surface hums the familiar queer tension of being both visible and unseen at the exact same time, of feeling like you're constantly on the edge of saying too much or not enough, of wanting to connect yet fearing the cost of honesty. And this tension follows Sam as she drifts slightly outside the cluster of girls, observing more than participating, a posture that LGBTQ+ viewers instantly recognize as the self-protective distance many queer teens learn to maintain, even among people they like, because blending in feels safer than risking exposure. When Teresa enters the scene, offering Sam a cigarette and sparking casual conversation about music, the moment feels gentle, organic, and deeply grounded in the queer experience of building connection through shared interests, subtle signals, and the slow discovery of someone who might understand you. And Teresa's enthusiasm, her rumbling monologue about Britpop and underground bands, and the thrill of being barely old enough to get into 18-plus spaces, conveys both her individuality and her willingness to let Sam into her world. Something that catches Sam off guard because she has spent so much of the film up to this point struggling to trust her own instincts about who is safe, who is real, and who might hurt her. Their conversation, meandering and unforced, reflects the innocence and trepidation of queer youth who have rarely been allowed to form friendships or flirtations without fear or confusion, and women watching. This scene may feel a pang of recognition in the way Sam listens more than she speaks. Her response is short but intrigued, her posture softening as Teresa talks about music and film, with the kind of passion that makes her seem like a lighthouse in a fog Sam has been wandering through for months. The film lingers on these moments not to imply romance prematurely, but to capture the emotional intimacy that blossoms when two young women stumble into a connection that feels unthreatening, mutual, and safe, a connection rooted in curiosity and the subtle excitement of being seen without being exposed. As they walk home together through the wash, a pathway that symbolizes the transitional spaces of adolescence, the liminal zones where young people talk, dream, and test the boundaries of their identities. Their conversation shifts toward films, aesthetics, and the rep theater Teresa frequents, and this part of the scene resonates deeply with queer viewers because so many LGBTQ+ lives are shaped by the art, music, and media that become secret portals into self-understanding. Especially in decades like the 1990s when representation was scarce, and so many queer girls learned to decode themselves through subtext, atmosphere, and the emotional resonance of stories that reflected their longing, even when they didn't explicitly reflect their identities. Teresa's invitation to watch a film together feels both casual and charged, not in a romantic or sexual way, but in that distinctly queer way where any gesture of closeness, any shared interest, any invitation becomes freighted with possibility simply because it makes you feel something you haven't allowed yourself to feel openly. And the moment Teresa suggests going together to the theater, there is a tremble of hope in Sam's expression, a mixture of anticipation and fear, because she is still learning to trust that someone could like her in a way that doesn't end in humiliation or rejection. When Teresa begins excitedly recounting movie plots, weaving enthusiastic tangents about actors and symbolism, Sam listens with a dawning warmth, letting her guard down inch by inch, and queer women watching this scene will understand how rare and precious it is, especially at 18, to meet someone who makes you feel comfortable enough to exist without rehearsing your every word. The way Teresa talks, endless, passionate, slightly chaotic, creates a space where Sam's silence feels less like withdrawal and more like absorption, and that sense of comfort is what allows the moment in the club later to become so poignant. When Teresa brings Sam to her favorite hangout spot, describing past chaos and inside jokes, the contrast between Sam's tentative awe and Teresa's easy confidence highlights a recurring queer dynamic. One girl who is beginning to discover herself in real time, and another who seems just a few steps ahead, not necessarily older but more practiced in the art of taking up emotional space, being open, and expressing affection without fear. The club is loud, vibrant, humid with life, and yet Sam's focus remains entirely on the girl walking beside her. The way Teresa's enthusiasm doesn't falter, the way she glances at Sam between stories to check that she's still there, still listening, still comfortable, and this is where the scene quietly shifts into deeper emotional territory, demonstrating how queer longing often builds not from dramatic declarations, but from small gestures of care, attention, and possibility. When Teresa finally, softly, almost shyly says she might want Sam as her girlfriend, the moment is handled with aching delicacy because it is not a bold confession but a hopeful suggestion, spoken with vulnerability that reveals Teresa's own longing and uncertainty. And Sam's response, halting, flustered, apologetic, embodies the layered pain of queer adolescence before self-acceptance, when saying no to someone you care about feels like a betrayal not because you don't reciprocate their feelings, but because you aren't ready to reciprocate your own truth. Her insistence that she likes Teresa but doesn't like her is steeped in the language of denial, fear, and internal conflict. The same vocabulary queer women often used in the 90s and early 2000s, when they lacked the courage, safety, or consciousness to admit what they felt, even to themselves. This interaction, quiet as it is, mirrors the emotional minefields queer women navigate when desire intersects with friendship, where saying the wrong thing can rupture something fragile, and where repressing one's feelings becomes a survival mechanism. Teresa's response, gentle, wounded but gracious, trying not to let Sam feel guilty, reflects a maturity and kindness that queer viewers will recognize as the heartbreaking generosity many LGBTQ+ teens learn to extend, because they understood rejection on both sides, receiving it from straight crushes and offering it reluctantly to other queer girls when the timing wasn't right. The The film refuses to villainize either girl, instead painting their misalignment as a natural part of queer emotional development, where desire and readiness rarely unfold in sync. And yet, even after this painful moment, Teresa remains companionable, encouraging Sam to continue their evening together, watch the film, enjoy the night, and reclaim something joyful from a moment that could have shattered them both. This resilience, this insistence on connection without punishment, challenges the societal narrative that same-gender attraction inevitably ruins friendships, offering instead a vision of queer relationality grounded in compassion, clarity, and emotional maturity, an element of queer culture that is rarely depicted with such nuance. The final stretch of the scene, where Sam refuses to enter her front door and breaks down in fear, becomes the emotional anchor that ties the entire sequence together, because it reveals the deeper trauma Sam carries beneath her interactions, the terror of facing a world that doesn't understand her, the dread of encountering judgment at home, the exhaustion of pretending to be someone she isn't, and the grief of feeling like every door, literal and metaphorical, demands a version of her she cannot sustain. Teresa's response here is quiet, supportive, and profoundly moving, offering Sam alternative ways in, both physically and emotionally, suggesting they use the back door not as a sneaky act but as a gesture of care, a recognition that Sam needs gentleness, options, and comfort rather than confrontation. And this moment resonates with queer women who remember what it felt like to dread going home, not because they didn't love their families, but because their families didn't yet know how to love all of them. The simplicity of Teresa saying it's going to be okay could easily be overlooked, but in the context of Sam's journey, it becomes a lifeline, a promise of solidarity, the kind of reassurance queer teens rarely received out loud in the 90s. The scene ultimately becomes a powerful meditation on emotional safety, longing, identity, and the tender, complicated ways queer girls find each other, lose each other, and support each other long before they fully know themselves, offering LGBTQ+ viewers not spectacle but recognition, truth, and the quiet beauty of becoming visible through connection. Scene 3 Part 2 of Teenage Lesbian represents one of the film's most quietly transformative emotional beats because it shows Sam stepping into a queer community space for the first time, something so many LGBTQ+ viewers will immediately recognize as an almost sacred moment, a before and after threshold in which the weight of isolation begins to lift, and the possibility of belonging emerges for the first time in a young person's life. The moment Meg brings Sam to the Be Proud youth group, introducing her not as a problem to be solved, but as someone worth welcoming, signals to the audience that Sam is beginning to find people who will not question her feelings, shame her confusion, or weaponize her vulnerability. And this is especially meaningful given how much of her journey, so far, has been shaped by betrayal, misinterpretations, and other people punishing her for desires she either didn't fully understand or didn't dare to articulate. Queer women watching this scene may feel a deep ache of recognition, because for so many LGBTQ+ people, the first time you sit among others like you, others who have stumbled, feared, loved, doubted, and come out in their own jagged ways, feels like a soft exhale after years of holding your breath. A moment when you realize you are not alone, you are not broken, and your story has echoes in the lives of people sitting just inches away. The way the group leader warmly invites Sam to sit on the couch, calling it the best seat in the house, immediately communicates tenderness and acceptance, which contrasts sharply with the emotional minefield Sam has faced in her family home, in her friendships, and in her romantic interactions. And this contrast helps the viewer sense how life-changing it can be simply to enter a room where queerness is assumed to be normal rather than deviant. As the group begins to share their coming-out stories, the scene becomes a tapestry of experiences that reflect the multi-pronged emotional landscape queer people navigate: shame, fear, secrecy, longing, rupture, resilience. And Sam absorbing these stories in silence mirrors the way many LGBTQ+ youth first encounter queer community. Quietly, cautiously, and with a mixture of awe and terror, because listening to others speak openly about identities you've been taught to hide can feel both liberating and destabilizing. Jen's story about her mother catching her on a message board, complete with the shame, the sobbing, and the complicated coexistence of love and judgment, echoes a common thread in queer childhood: the fear of being discovered not on your own terms, paired with the unexpected relief of no longer carrying the secret alone. And for many women watching this scene, Jen's confession about her mother saying she doesn't understand how two women will sting with familiarity, because so many queer daughters have faced a version of this bewildering disapproval, that strange parental mixture of love, fear, and ignorance that can feel like rejection. Even when it isn't meant as such, Dina's story, involving a years-long crush on a close friend and the silent mutual understanding that grew between them, resonates deeply with queer girls who learn to navigate desire in coded gestures, careful glances, and the delicate dance of wanting someone who may never want you back. And her anecdote about her friend intuiting her attraction without ever forcing her to speak it aloud reflects a kind of gentle queer communication that women often rely on in adolescence. An unspoken agreement to acknowledge the truth without confrontation, to protect each other's emotional vulnerability as best as teenagers can. Then Sarah shares her story about secretly dating another girl. The mix of exhilaration and fear, the way everyone at school already knew even when she and her girlfriend thought they were being careful. And this part will resonate with so many queer viewers who understand the strange duality of being simultaneously invisible and obvious, of thinking you are hiding well while others have already recognized something in you that you can barely name. And her relief when her best friend simply says, "I know," reflects that small, life-altering moment when someone sees your truth and responds with acceptance rather than condemnation. As Sam listens to these stories, the camera lingers on her expression, thoughtful, hesitant, unsettled, and viewers can sense how profoundly she is absorbing what she hears, not just intellectually but emotionally, because each testimony offers her a potential mirror, a way to understand parts of herself that she has been afraid to face. And as women and queer audiences observe her processing this, there is a powerful sense of solidarity, because we know what it feels like to realize you are not an anomaly, that your experiences fit into a broader human pattern, that others have walked your path and survived. The scene subtly critiques society's long-standing discomfort with women-loving women, a discomfort rooted not only in misogyny, but in cultural narratives that treat female intimacy as dangerous, disruptive, or inappropriate, unless it is filtered through the male gaze. And by letting these young women tell their stories without sensationalism, the film asserts that lesbian and bisexual experiences deserve space, voice, and dignity, challenging the assumption that queer female desire must remain invisible, shameful, or hypersexualized. What makes this scene emotionally potent is that it treats queerness not as spectacle but as community, as a chain of shared experiences that help young people grow into themselves. And Sam's silent presence serves as an entry point for LGBTQ+ viewers, who remember their first time listening to others articulate feelings they had never dared to verbalize. When Sam later meets with the guidance counselor and finally says, "With quiet resolve, I'm gay," the moment hits with enormous emotional weight because it is not framed as a dramatic reveal, but as a gentle affirmation, the natural result of hearing others speak openly about their lives. And the counselor's reaction, surprised, awkward, but ultimately supportive, illustrates the generational gap that many queer youth must navigate, where adults may not fully understand but can still choose to be compassionate. Sam's confession that she has always known but didn't fully realize it until summer camp echoes the stories told in the support group, creating a narrative continuity that emphasizes how queer identity often emerges in fragments, glances, friendships, crushes, moments of recognition, and how painful it can be when those early experiences are met with hostility, confusion, or shame. The way she describes Tabitha with gentle admiration and innocence is particularly resonant for queer women who remember their first same-gender attraction as something tender and scary, something that made the world feel both bigger and more precarious. And when the counselor interrupts her story, signaling discomfort, it symbolizes how society often tries to shut down young women's expressions of queer longing, framing them as inappropriate or too detailed, even when they are described in purely emotional terms. This discomfort persists today because female desire, especially when directed toward other women, has historically been policed, minimized, or erased, and the scene subtly critiques that policing by showing how Sam's attempts to speak honestly are met with a man's instinct to redirect or silence, not out of malice but out of cultural conditioning. Yet the counselor's eventual acceptance, his acknowledgement that her identity is a pretty big deal, creates a small but meaningful moment of validation, suggesting that even imperfect allies can provide emotional oxygen to queer youth when they choose empathy over avoidance. For women and LGBTQ+ viewers, the entire sequence becomes a layered exploration of belonging, identity, repression, and the longing for spaces where authenticity is not only allowed but encouraged. And Sam's emotional journey reflects the universal queer struggle to move from silence into speech, from secrecy into community, from internal confusion into self-recognition. The Be Proud group functions symbolically as a doorway into queer adulthood, offering Sam models of resilience, courage, and vulnerability. And by listening to their stories, she begins to weave her own narrative into a fabric larger than herself. This is not about romance or scandal or voyeurism. It is about truth, safety, and the profound relief of knowing that your feelings do not make you strange, that your desire does not make you dangerous, that your story does not isolate you but binds you to a lineage of people who have loved, feared, hoped, and survived in all the ways you are beginning to. And for LGBTQ+ women especially, This scene is a reminder that community is not just about belonging, but about recognition, about finally being seen not as someone who deviates from normalcy, but as someone whose experiences are human, understandable, and worthy of compassion. In this final stretch of Scene 3, the film shifts into a quieter, more reflective emotional register, one that captures a universal queer truth. Sometimes self-understanding doesn't explode in a single revelation, but accumulates softly, through conversations, moments of friction, gestures of care, and the ordinary chaos of life pressing in at the edges. And this long sequence shows Sam finally taking up emotional space in a world that has repeatedly taught her she isn't supposed to. What makes this portion of the story resonate so deeply with lesbian and queer audiences, especially those who remember coming of age in a time that offered barely any representation, is that it doesn't frame Sam's identity as a spectacle or a source of melodrama. Instead, it recognizes that queer realization often unfolds through contrast, through witnessing other people's stories, through feeling the difference between being tolerated and being understood, through the slow recognition that the people who make you feel safe, warm, and seen are pointing you toward your truth. Sam moves from social disorientation into a world of relatable, messy humanity when she begins hearing other young LGBTQ+ people share their coming-out stories. Accounts shaped by fear, humor, heartbreak, denial, love, fatigue, and the simple desire to stop pretending. And what these moments do for her is open a door inside her that had been locked for years. They offer a mirror she didn't know she needed. For so many queer women, this experience is achingly familiar. The first time you hear someone else speak the truth you've only dared whisper to yourself, your world expands, and suddenly language exists for something you felt but never named. The film honors that transformation by letting Sam listen, rather than forcing her to perform, a subtle but meaningful refusal to equate self-acceptance with public disclosure. The authenticity in these group scenes reflects how queer community can serve as an emotional incubator, a place where women learn to name the longing they carry, the shame they've been taught, and the desire they've been conditioned to hide. The contrast between these soft, vulnerable confessions and Sam's tense, surface-level interactions with her old social circle underscores how two different worlds have been shaping her, one that asks for performance and silence, and one that welcomes her as she is. The moment when JC and the others join Sam and Sarah later only heightens this tension, especially when Sam's longtime friend expresses surprise, even hurt, that Sam attended the LGBTQ+ center without her. This reaction, while subtle, illuminates another reality of queer experience. Sometimes the people closest to us want access to our vulnerability without recognizing that we might need space to understand ourselves before inviting them in. It isn't malicious, it's simply another form of pressure, another reminder that queer women are expected to manage everyone's emotions except their own. Sam's hesitance, her desire to downplay the moment, reveals how deeply she fears being perceived differently, pigeonholed, or misunderstood. In queer life, especially for women, visibility is often a negotiation rather than a declaration. The need to control who knows, when they know, what they think, and how they react becomes its own emotional labor. That burden is visible in Sam's reluctance to describe her experience at the center as meaningful, even though it clearly was. When Sarah sits with her afterward, their conversation becomes the emotional heart of the sequence, because it is the first time someone directly names the connection between them without fear or embarrassment. Sarah's gentle invitation to continue seeing each other outside the group feels like a hand extended not just in interest but in recognition. I see you, even if you can't say everything yet. This is an intimacy beyond romance, an intimacy of safety. Women, especially queer women, know this feeling intimately the moment someone meets you where you are rather than where they want you to be. It's a moment that affirms that your pace, your hesitations, your quiet feelings are valid and worth honoring. When Sarah invites Sam to a weekend food gathering, not a rally, not a parade, not something intimidating, the gesture matters because it reassures Sam that queerness isn't only loud or outspoken. It can be slow, soft, communal, domestic, and gentle. Society often caricatures queer women as either hypersexualized or politically intense, rarely allowing depictions of the in-between, the ordinary tenderness that defines real life, and here, the film carves out that space. Then comes Sam's coming out to her mother, a moment so understated yet so deeply real that it anchors the entire narrative arc. The mother's reaction, warm and immediate, breaks from the predictable trauma narrative often forced upon queer stories and instead gestures towards something both hopeful and true to many experiences, that not all parents reject, that acceptance, while imperfect and sometimes delayed, is possible and powerful. Her mother's tenderness, her desire to support Sam, even her somewhat clumsy attempts to show enthusiasm, all echo the experience of many queer women whose parents did not always know what to say but tried anyway, and that trying matters. This kind of acceptance stands in stark contrast not only to the bullying Sam experienced earlier in the film, but to the internalized dread she has carried, reminding viewers how transformative it is when the people who raised you stop being shadows you fear and instead become witnesses to your becoming. When Sam reveals that she's already seeing someone, already allowing herself this joy, her mother's quiet delight seems to tell Sam something she didn't know she needed to hear: that her happiness is not burden, that her love is not something to hide, that her future is not something to fear. For queer women especially, this kind of parental affirmation often feels revolutionary. It challenges a society where many still view LGBTQ+ identities as deviations or complications. It challenges the discomfort many still hold about women expressing love for each other, discomfort rooted in patriarchal narratives that punish women for choosing themselves over heteronormative expectation. That discomfort persists because women's autonomy, women's desire, and women's emotional worlds have historically been controlled, minimized, or sexualized for the male gaze. But here, the film rejects all of that by grounding every interaction between Sam and Sarah in mutual respect, quiet longing, and emotional truth rather than sensationalism. When Sam and Sarah spend the evening of Sam's birthday together, the film treats their time not as a fantasy, but as something beautifully ordinary. Dinner, conversation, gentle teasing, small gifts, shared glances, slow smiles. Their symbolic, gentle kiss, handled with restraint and emotional honesty, functions not as a moment of spectacle, but as a culmination of trust. It's the kind of kiss queer women often imagine long before they experience it, one rooted in safety, in mutual seeing, in the relief of finally allowing oneself to want without fear. It resonates because it captures a distinctly queer emotional milestone: the transition from internalized longing to mutual recognition, without fetishizing it or framing it as taboo. Instead, it honors the feeling of soft terror and soft joy that comes with giving your heart to someone who understands why it took you this long. When Sam admits that she once felt intimidated by Sarah's beauty and confidence, what she's really confessing is that she didn't yet believe she deserved the tenderness she now receives. For queer women, especially those who grew up isolated, mocked, or shoved into roles they never fit, the idea of being allowed to desire and be desired can feel impossible. This storyline understands that, and it gives Sam the emotional arc she deserves, not a perfect one, not a linear one, but one built on community, self-recognition, romantic possibility, and the slow building of a life where she no longer needs to apologize for who she is. By the time Sarah tells her she's glad they talked, and by the time Sam softly responds, we feel the weight of everything that has brought her here. The years of silence, the confusion, the isolation, the longing, the bruises both literal and emotional. What makes this scene so powerful for queer and female audiences is that it celebrates the intimacy of becoming, the quiet victory of seeing oneself reflected in another person's eyes and realizing you are no longer alone. In a world still uncomfortable with women choosing women, still eager to minimize or sensationalize queer love, this storyline stands firmly in its truth: that these moments matter, that tenderness matters, that women's emotional lives matter, and that queer joy, small, gentle, hard-won, is worthy of being seen without apology.